Hello, JJA fans out in Radioland. The Jazz Journalists Association is proud to put on its first webinar of the 2014-2015 season, Jazz Radio in Transition. I'm Howard Mandel, president of the Jazz Journalists Association. Sorry for the technical delays, but it is pretty remarkable that we have Linda Yohn from Ypsilanti, Michigan, music director of WEMU, Jeff Hanley and Brad Stone, both based in California. Jeff is the new program host of Jazz After Hours, and Brad, after 35 years of work in terrestrial radio, has gone to soulandjazz.com, an online satellite station. And our friend and jazz hero, Jim Wilke, the, I guess, founder of Jazz After Hours and program host until recently, is still trying to get on our Google Hangout. So we hope you'll be able to join us presently. It is difficult to deal with the new technology. For instance, there goes my phone telling me that, yeah, okay, that my battery is running low. So we're going to ignore that if possible. And continue or begin to introduce our theme tonight, which is Jazz Radio in Transition. And a question is, what's changing for you? Let's start off with Brad.
Well, certainly a lot's changed for me in the last couple of years after working in terrestrial radio at several radio stations over about a 35-year time period. I made the transition to internet radio, so it was really quite different in some ways, but in a lot of other ways, you know, radio is radio. So what was really nice about it for me personally is I was able to start working out of my home studio, which was really great. That I was able to use radio studio that I built at home many years ago when I had dabbled in some internet radio, and kind of revised my studio and was able to use my collection of music at home, which had been collecting dust, but now I have access to it, and so that's been great. But more importantly, in terms of the platform, we have with soulandjazz.com, we have a platform that we'll soon go to a live stream and a brand new app that's going to be coming out where people all over the world can listen to it on their iPhone or on their Android device. And I kind of liken it to going back to the transistor radio days in a sense, only it'll be worldwide. So that's kind of exciting.
Interesting enough. We'll get into that a little further. Jeff, maybe you can give us some information about the transition that's occurred at Jazz After Hours, and a little bit of your own background too. You know, you're one of the founding fathers of KJazz, KJZZ.
Well, there's a ever so slight bit of confusion about that, only because those call letters were in Seattle when I was working on that station, and so when that was published on my bio, I've actually never lived in Arizona, so I don't really have any connection to the station in Arizona. The call letters were moved there many years ago. But yes, I was the founding program director of KJazz in Seattle, and more recently, this has been an incredibly thrilling summer for me to work with Jim in the transition to become the host of Jazz After Hours on PRI. He and I worked pretty close of the summer, including me spending 3 days at his home and asking him every possible question I could think of, and to try to glean as much information as I could from him and try to build on his 30-year history as the host of the show. So it's been pretty exciting for me. I took over on October 1st, and so I'm 6 or 7 weeks into it now, and having a great time.
Sounds good. And Linda, a brief update on where WEMU is right now, or where you are with it.
Okay. WEMU has a jazz-centric public radio station since about 1982, before I took over as music 7. The music director was Jim Dolzo. He was also the writer for the Detroit News in jazz. Going, and we've made some incredible interesting Detroit Jazz Festival broadcasts over the years. But things have been really tough for us in this depression. Everyone else in America wants to call it a recession. We're in Michigan, so we're going to call it, even though we're based in Ann Arbor, in Ypsilanti, broadcasting to Ann Arbor primarily, with an affluent community, there are still some real financial setbacks that we have to deal with. And so jazz radio in transition. But I am truly proud to say that we are weathering that transition, and we're one dating jazz radio station.
Well, this is what we're going to talk about tonight, what some of these transitions mean and how they interact with each other. Also, I want to mention that the JJA webinars, Talking Jazz, are supported by the Jazz Cruise through its Anita E. Berry Educational Fund. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention our own sponsorship. But the financials behind jazz radio are certainly something that we need to dig into here to be candid about what's going on with this medium today. And we have a syndicated show in Jazz After Hours. Jeff, I don't know how that's funded. Is PRI, Public Radio International, a producer of that show?
No, I'm the sole producer of the show, and I provide the content rather to the network, and then they distribute it to their affiliates, who, as I understand it, pay a subscription fee for having access to the show. So I'm at least a step or two insulated from the economic concerns, which is a luxury. I certainly understand the other constraints that are on the public radio stations, and so for me, it's actually a significantly easier economic situation. I provide the content, and then PRI takes responsibility for distributing it to their stations who are subscribing to the show.
But it is a professional position for you, is it not?
Oh yes, yes. I mean, they pay me. I was trying not to dwell on that, but they pay me.
And what about soulandjazz.com, Brad? How does that work? Is that a sponsored station, or what is it?
Yeah, it's a good question, Howard. soulandjazz.com, there are some different revenue streams that help support it being on the air, and hopefully it's something that will be sustainable. First of all, it's a subscription. It started out as a subscription-based podcast service, so that subscribers could have access to, and still do, have access to all the programs from all the programmers on the station, going back to the beginning. So there's about 5 years worth of material there already. People can listen for free to the current program. For instance, this week's Creative Source, my program, people can listen to. As soon as the new program goes up tomorrow, then they'll be able to listen to that one. So subscribers are able to do that. Then we have a number of sponsors. I could mention that, for instance, Sennheiser is a sponsor of the station. And then we also have the Be Heard service, which is a promotional tool for artists to be able to get their music out to programmers perhaps they can't afford to hire an independent radio promoter, so they can use this service to provide clips of their latest release to programmers, and then programmers can give feedback, and if they want a copy of the CD or digital download, they can do that. So that's another revenue stream. So between all those things, Brian Hurst, who's the founder of soulandjazz.com, has been able to keep this thing going for this length of time, and hopefully for the foreseeable future.
Linda, you must be aware of these models. Have these had a negative impact on listenership or on funding for WEMU? And is WEMU mostly listener supported? Or, as I understand it, it's part of Eastern Michigan University and liable to be rolling with the economic tide that affects the school. Is that the case?
Yeah, I think so. I lost the video feed. Can you still hear and see me?
I can, yes. Jim trying to call in again.
Okay, I can't see you.
Uh-oh.
Okay, I can't see you, but that's fine. I can hear you, and that's what counts, right? This is radio.
Radio.
Okay, so let's just go back to the question, and I'll answer it properly.
Okay. WEMU has been supported principally by Eastern Michigan University, as I understand it, and is liable to suffer from budget constraints that the school has. Is that the case?
Exactly. Starting 4 years ago, we really began to feel the effects of the Depression. I mean, it took longer for people to really realize that you cannot give to a public radio entity or anything in charitable giving like you used to give before. And things began to really pull back. And so the regents of the university questioned the amount that was being spent on this non-academic enterprise, and decided that if they were going to spend X amount of dollars on this enterprise at the university, then they should program it. And what they had maybe chosen to program it with would not be what we program today, if you catch my drift. So, the wise leadership at that time, General Manager Arthur Timko and Assistant General Manager Molly Motherwell, decided, here's a plan. Over 3 years, we'll take ourselves off the EMU dole to the tune of $500,000. We cut staff, we cut programming, and we did that. And then there was an additional $100,000 in budget cuts that came down in FY14, unexpected. So over 3 years, we took a $600,000 budget cut.
I'm sorry, I've got Jim Wilke on my cell phone here, but I don't think that helps us join him to the discussion. Hi, Jim. That's what you're on our video phone, but not on the discussion itself. And we're just talking to Linda about the fairly catastrophic budget cuts that she's had to face at WEMU. It doesn't make any sense for me to be holding this up and talking to you, Jim. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead. Okay. I don't. Okay. I don't know. Well, you can't connect. Yeah, I'm not sure how we're going to do with this. I'll keep playing with it. Okay, he'll keep playing with it. Fine. Thank you. Bye. So, Linda, I'm sorry, and I don't want to ignore Jeff and Brad in this, but maybe you guys can chime in some ways. Do the formats, the online format or the syndicated show format, offer any alternatives to the situation that somebody facing what you're facing, Linda? Is it possible to save a station and expand on its programming by doing more online? Is that cheaper in some way, or feasible to make those shifts in format? And Jeff, is PRI also distributed online? I assume it is.
I don't want to answer inaccurately. I don't know much about the online presence. I know the focus for Jazz After Hours has clearly been the terrestrial stations, and PRI has a very extensive web presence, but I don't know anything about whether the content is streamed online. I know that virtually every station that airs Jazz After Hours also has a live stream. I mean, I think it's like 100% of the stations have live streams. So that's actually how I'm able to check in with the show while it's airing on the East Coast, for example. I can just log in and to the various stations' live streams and hear what's going on and know that it made it to air and that sort of thing. But I think that this dichotomy between terrestrial and streaming is clearly a problematic area and something that hasn't really worked itself out, even though people have been streaming. I mean, I've personally been streaming my own content for almost 13 years, and it's kind of my day job. But I don't suspect that it's much more. I don't think it's an answer to the terrestrial radio stations' economic problems. In fact, it's an additional cost that they would incur for bandwidth, and I think it's a real struggle.
I see. I'm seeing that Jim is almost joining us, so this is why I'm a little distracted by watching the dashboard here. Brad, are you aware of soulandjazz.com avoiding costs because it is an online station only?
Not sure how to answer that. There certainly is a significant cost involved in. There's Jim.
Hey.
Hi, Jim.
Sorry, man.
Hey.
Nuts here. Hi, Brad.
No. Jim Wilke. Welcome.
To get back to your question, Howard, so there is a significant cost in terms of putting soulandjazz.com out there that Brian Hurst has been working with for the last few years, trying to make it a financially viable, a long-term financially viable operation. And so we're still seeking sponsorship, and trying to grow it as a business and make it financially viable. I'm not sure that I'm really answering your question, though. But go ahead,
give
Howard.
Some sense, though. You've given some sense. Linda, I assume that WEMU does have an online presence also, right?
Oh, we've had one for a long, long time, and it's something that you just do as listener service. Have we really benefited in terms of a giant revenue stream from it? But in terms of reliability and listener service and dependability, you gotta do it. It's 2014. You should have woken up and smelled that coffee 15 years ago, which we did.
But yet it does not really provide the income stream that we need either to sustain a station.
No, not really. But again, it's something that you need to do. And and you fight this whole thing of like Sirius XM and Pandora and all the myriad choices that people have in broadcasting and choices today. And the real thing for a terrestrial radio host is to make what you do appealing on a local level of it's 13 degrees outside and we've got 3 inches of snow on the ground, but you're also programming local artists, but your talent and your announcing skills and your musical choice rival.
You know, this is something that I would think that Jim Wilke has dealt with over the years, the 30 years of Jazz After Hours, because you've had a locally based produced show, Jim, but also been widely syndicated. So you're straddling that local appeal and national, I would say international appeal also. Is that true?
Yeah, exactly. And I worked hard to keep it to give it local appeal while still appearing to be national. One thing, being based in Seattle, I'm much more aware of the whole jazz scene than I think a New Yorker is. We're not very provincial out here because we're watching all the rest of the country too at the same time. So as a result, I've often, and Jeff has carried this on too, of mentioning gigs going on in the individual areas in which we're broadcast. So yeah, we do talk about what's going on in New York and LA, but we also talk about what's going on in Ohio and various locations, and in Illinois and other locales in which the show is broadcast, and in mid-Missouri and so on. And that gives it a local flavor to a national show, and we've been very conscientious about that, and Jeff's carrying that on.
Well, I can imagine.
Go ahead.
I can imagine an online stream being a source of revenue at this point. For one thing, people are so used to getting online content for free. You'd have a very hard time, I think, getting them to pay for it. But it is an absolutely critical element in listener engagement. I think that social media and online streaming content is a critical tool in the toolbox of a terrestrial radio station. And I'm speaking, I'll be very full disclosure here, I'm speaking as a person who doesn't work for a terrestrial radio station. But I've been an observer of that for a very long time, and like I say, streaming my own content for a very long time. And I think the listener connection that happens and the added engagement is critical. And I'm not sure how stations can economically balance the additional costs with that rather ephemeral concept of listener engagement. But many stations are sure trying to do it.
Can I say something on that? Listener engagement, I think, stems from the host and the presenter. I grew up listening to, in Iowa, listening to a disc jockey in New Orleans. And this disc jockey in New Orleans felt like he was in my room every night talking to me and playing the music to me. And that, I think, sort of engagement really stems from the host. It's not from necessarily if you're talking about the temperature or who's playing at the local club.
Well, I think that Linda seems to have disappeared from the call at the moment, and I'm sure she's trying to get back on, brought up the point that I think is central to the whole idea of transitions, which is that there are so many available choices now. And Jim, would that New Orleans radio DJ have been able, is that something you would have stumbled onto years ago?
I stumbled onto it, yeah. Tuning across the dial late night, I heard some music I liked. I listened for a while. I liked the presenter. And it was a show out of WW New Orleans, AM station, which was on a clear channel frequency, and they were heard all over the United States at night. And this guy had a tremendous following all over the country that way. And he just, you know, he had that one-on-one kind of feel that I just, you really identify with. It really draws you in.
Brad, is that something that you're trying to emulate with Creative Source?
Absolutely, Howard. I do completely agree with Jim. I think, you know, the connection with the presenter, I think, is really vital. And I had similar experiences growing up in Chicago with certain DJs that I grew up with and that I still try to emulate and that I learned a lot from in terms of presentation. And I do think that having that kind of personal connection when you're on the air, striving to make it seem as though you're talking one-on-one as opposed to, you know, 1,000 people or 10,000 people, and making that connection with each listener. I think it's an important part of what we do and what makes radio still appealing, as opposed to, you know, versus Pandora or Spotify that lack that personal connection or the human element. So I think that you know, even though, for instance, soulandjazz.com is internet casting worldwide, still trying to make it sound as if it's local and make those local connections whenever possible, as Jim and Jeff spoke to. I think that is definitely something that we're trying to emulate and trying to bring to our listeners.
Let me just take a moment to mention to our attendees who are beginning to post questions and comments that I will get to these, but since we started a little bit late, we'll run a little bit longer. You're going to have to wait until we can get to some of the things that you're asking and commenting on. I'm Howard Mandel. This is Talking Jazz, the webinar of the Jazz Journalists Association. It's sponsored by the Jazz Cruise through its Anita E. Berry Jazz Education Fund. And I'm here with Linda Yohn, who's back. Jim Wilke now is here. Jeff Hanley, who's on Jazz After Hours, having taken over from Jim, and Brad Stone from soulandjazz.com. So it seems like there's so much great radio out there, and all of the hosts that I know of, and I must say this panel is veterans. Derek Lucas from WGMC Rochester, I had invited him to be on the panel, and he regretted that he couldn't, but he said that's a blue ribbon panel, and indeed it is. All of you strive to create the independent, the individual connection, the personal connection, but how do you market what you're doing so that people know about you out there? They have all these choices. Are people scanning online, trying to find interesting music on stations the way we used to, you know, twist the knob and see what would come in clearly? Is that what's happening today? People are browsing for good jazz online and choosing their stations by what they hear that way?
Well, there are stations. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Linda.
Okay. Oh, okay. I'm back. I had problems. I lost the feed, but I'm back. You know what? I really don't think that. I think people are cruising online, but they're not cruising radio the way that we used to do that, even flipping back from the AM to the FM band. So I don't think they're doing that. But I guess it's our job. And I saw one comment of a guy saying, I don't care about Prez and I don't care about Bird. And I think we'll address that. But I think it's our job to create kind of a rediscovery, and that is is in its transition. At this point in time, we're transitioning back to playing some of the true giants of jazz, of Sonny Rollins, of John Coltrane, of Sarah Vaughan, and if a new musician today does not meet that gravitas, then we're not going to play it. We've lost of live and local programming due to the dollar budget cut. Therefore, anything that I choose to play from the new bins has got to resonate with that same beautiful integrity. And so, but I am going to contrast and concentrate on the true and lead it forward, but way in 1960 and on beyond.
Yeah.
The temporary transition is okay, and I'll shut up in just a moment. But I got to tell you this: we went through a survey. Okay, we went through a survey of our existing listenership, and the existing listenership said we would much rather hear John Coltrane, Sarah Vaughan, Johnny Hartman, and Bud Powell than the latest unknown. So I'm just passing it on to you. This is what we've learned. This is part of our transition, and we have to serve those who took the time to fill out that survey. There you go.
What about the?
Yeah, I'm taking exactly the opposite approach.
Yeah.
Not to be contrary, but I'm taking the opposite approach, and I have to give credit to Jim for the encouragement and inspiration to do that. As I mentioned earlier, he and I have had many hours of conversation since I started engaging Jazz After Hours, and based on what I learned from him and his approach, that has been pretty successful for the show over the last many years, and also what a gut feeling that I have that building an audience and making sure that there are people who are coming up from younger age groups and becoming listeners to public radio and becoming fans of jazz and going to the clubs and supporting the musicians while they're playing live. I've got to give those people the consideration that their age group artists are of great interest to them. And I've seen this with the popularity of many jazz musicians these days who probably would cause older jazz fans to plug their ears. But I think that there is some real excitement going on in the jazz community right now, and the musicians are using social media. I'm trying to use social media, and I'm not saying that nobody ever twists the dial anymore, but I think now we have many, many more tools to use to reach new audience, and I think it's possible to walk a fine line and balance between playing some new artists and encouraging them and the ecosystem that is the new jazz artists out there, and still balance that with music that's listenable to an older fan who grew up in the Blue Note era.
Right. I want to say I've got a couple
comment on that.
Kind of speak
on that.
I mean, Rob Hoff, one of our attendees, says that he's found that funding comes from older listeners who prefer standards and mainstream by the legends, and not music from the younger artists who are taking the music in new directions. But Jeff, you're identifying that those younger artists have to be spoken. Younger audiences need to be spoken to by younger musicians, and they're not necessarily the people funding. But then, Jeff, you with Jazz After Hours are getting marketed by PRI or by the individual stations, which themselves are doing the fundraising. So that's in their bailiwick, that responsibility.
Well, and I think the older jazz musicians would, I don't mean to put words in their mouth, but I have a feeling that they would support that point of view because they're doing it musically. They're bringing young players into their groups, and they're forming ensembles that are a great mix of generations. And the more I learn about the current jazz world out there by being in touch with the musicians and the clubs and watching the tours and listening to the records that are being released now, the stronger I feel about that.
Brad, what's your programming like, this mix of new and old?
Well, my programming philosophy has really always been one that has been geared towards new releases, and playing the live guys, and really gearing things towards a younger audience, and certainly having been on a college radio station for many years, that sort of approach sort of lent itself naturally to being at a university station. But I feel so strongly, and I really agree with Jeff wholeheartly. And I also want to say that I know that Linda, over the years, she has programmed a ton of new releases and younger artists, and so she's been one of the programmers at the forefront of bringing new music to people. But I really feel so strongly about the fact that there is just so much great new music out there. Just more releases than ever. All these young players with great chops, composing skills, really serious about their craft, very compelling music, and there's just not the outlets for their music unless we do this. And although jazz radio, in terms of what the delivery mechanism is in a state of transition, and actual record product, whether it be CDs or digital delivery or whatever the format is, that's in a state of transition, and who knows where it's going to be 5 years from now. But the bottom line is, that's all about formatics, but the music is there, and the music is great, and I just feel very, very passionately about getting the music out there. So, I play the live guys. My programming is 95% based on new releases, new music, current artists. Does that mean I don't play Miles Davis? No, of course not. I like to say I go back to the archives, but it really is geared towards the younger musicians and musicians that don't get a chance to be heard otherwise.
And if we're going to support jazz and its health, let's face it, jazz musicians are not making much money off their recordings these days. I mean, the news has been full of stories about how someone will make 4 cents off all the Spotify plays that they get. But they are making music in live performance, and I think that getting people out to see live jazz performed in the clubs or in the concert halls is a key element in supporting the ecosystem, supporting the musicians, and helping the younger players go from being unknowns to treasured musical assets, and because if they don't get played and they don't get exposed and people don't see them in concert, that's never going to happen. I mean, thinking really long term here, I think supporting the new players is critical to keeping jazz alive and making this the theme of this conversation about jazz radio and transition, about making that transition a more successful one, a smoother one. And I get the argument about familiar stuff and recognizable stuff and established stuff is easier for people to hear sometimes, but we're not always here in jazz radio just to play things that are easy for people to hear, and right. Don't mistake that for playing really outside stuff. That's not what I'm referring to. But my audience, is as short a time as I've had with them, seems to really thrive on new exposure to new artists.
Well, Linda, there's a shout out to you from Robin Lloyd, of Seattle. So
Okay.
live and local and personality, yes. And you do have done live broadcasting from the Detroit Jazz Festival. Isn't that
Oh
so?
yeah. Oh yeah, we have. But I need to chime in on the whole aspect of being a part of then supporting live performances. What we also have had to deal with is the fact that for decades you'd talk about an artist performing at a venue and you'd give them the airtime and you do an interview and you do this out of the goodness of your heart for the love of jazz and the love of the art form. But in 2014, in our financial situation, you you can't just give the airtime away. You can't give an hour of airtime away without some consideration from like venue owners or record labels. I mean, the financial situation is that real at WEMU. So I think venue owners or promoters need to understand that if they want an interview and they want all that and they want this great publicity from a radio station, that they've got to help the radio station out as well. It's part of a real transitionary thing that I know people don't want to hear, but it's the truth.
Jim Wilke, I see you shaking your head, I think in agreement. You want to chime in on this, please?
Well, a number of things that have come up here in the last few minutes that I'd like to comment on. First of all, you have to be a little careful, I think, when you survey your audience to find out what their tastes are, because their tastes will inevitably be what you are giving them at the present time, because they wouldn't be listening to you if they didn't already like it. So when you do a survey with your audience, I think a lot of times what you get is affirmation of what you're already doing. So I think you have to be a little careful about that. As far as programming new artists, as Jeff mentioned, that's always been one of my focuses, and I really feel it's important to stress this, because that's what jazz has always been about. It's been about the innovation. It's not about playing the hits. And we just can't go on with playing the same old music over and over again, because then it becomes sort of hits of the 50s or hits of the 60s or hits of the 70s or whatever era we're concentrating on. We really need to bring the music along, and that's, if you think about all the great DJs in history, the legendary DJs, they always played new music. They were always hitting you up with the latest release by Charlie Parker or Lester Young or whoever. So that's really at the core of what we do. And if we don't play it, or if we play it only rarely, then I think our audiences finds it very unfamiliar and very hard to deal with. So we've got to bring it along as we go. Now the question of balance, how much new music as opposed to old music, is open to interpretation. I've always gone very heavy into new music, and Linda obviously is the other way. And
No, wait a minute. Let me interrupt. I have been a strong new music programmer for decades, but I've got a new program director who would really like us to try a more classic approach to build some core audience, and we're going to try that. It's part of our transition.
Uh-huh. How old is your core audience then for oldies? That's the problem.
Right now we're skewing about like 57 for the basic listenership.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I always say you can tell someone how old someone is by what kind of jazz they like. Whoever was popular when they were between 18 and 25.
Yeah.
I'm getting a lot of interesting comments from some very interesting people out in our attendee group. Let me get to just a couple of these. Question for Brad. It's been noted that the lion's share of support for jazz on public radio has come from older listeners who want nothing but standards as opposed to newer artists. Since online radio and streaming to phones goes to a younger audience, are you and Brian Hurst consciously programming to appeal to that younger demographic? And then I have feedback from several programmers that programming younger artists is actually helping them to get funding. One programmer stated his show alone brought in $60K by only playing new music. Still, I agree with Linda, local personality is very, very key. Who is that from? Karen Gaffney, I believe. Says Rob Hoff, I have many listeners who are local college students, but they're not able to lend financial support.
But someday they will.
Yeah.
That's important to know. If they
get them in your pocket now.
Build your fan base now and get those listeners engaged in public radio or jazz radio, and when they have money, when they start their careers and start to build their homes and their families, then they'll become your contributors. Otherwise, if you've never engaged them, if you've never brought them into the fold, you're never going to have them as supporters.
Well, I think Linda makes a good point of the need for other players in the ecosystem to come in and help support, especially if we're going to be presenting new artists. So if the venues have somebody coming into town, live music, they should, it seems to me, be aware that to get on radio with that new artist builds the audience, and it helps the radio station to put that artist on. So there's got to be some sort of, you have a nonprofit radio station, Linda, you can't accept advertising, but there's got to be some sort of support that's coming. Since record companies are not offering financial support as they did either.
No, they're not. But if minimal support from a venue to make it possible, like ticket giveaways and packages in support that we can give to listeners, that can help. An ongoing agreement between WEMU and a venue that, WEMU is going to support this event, and that venue will in turn support WEMU. But it just seems so hard to get a venue to think that way, because they're so used to a public radio station just giving it away altruistically all the time. And people, if I could live that way, I was born in 1950. I'm an ex-hippie, peace, love, public radio, and jazz. If I could give it away, you guys all know me, if I could give it away, I would. I can't. All right?
All right. We don't want you to have to give it away. You can sell it,
Brad all right, I broke you up. All right. Woo!
Says Jay Hunter, who's up in Albany, it isn't a question of me not liking Prez or Bird. It's the young listeners that we need to continue to survive. And then I guess there was R.B. Frew, who's out in Alaska. Jay Hunter says, big band and vocal jazz ensembles, that's the Jazz in the Schools program. So even the new younger audience that we need is going to go for more mainstream stuff, not free jazz or other avant-garde. Does anybody program avant-garde music? Have you been playing the Coltrane Offering or something like that recently?
I mixed some of it into... Sorry, two of us were talking at the same time, I think. I do feel an obligation to program some challenging music, whether you want to call it free jazz or avant-garde or outside musics that fall into those categories. I mix some of the stuff in, like for instance, Pi Recordings. You know, they've got some fabulous music, and I think it deserves some airtime. It deserves to be heard. Do I want the whole show to necessarily sound like that? Not necessarily. I mean, there are weeks when I might be a little bit more progressive or more challenging than others. But I think if you're a good programmer, you can judiciously mix it in and expose the listener. Take them out and then bring them back in and challenge them a little bit and get that wonderful music exposed, because it's just it's crying to be heard. It deserves an audience.
I want to put in a plug here for my local radio station now, WDCB from College of DuPage, which does a terrific job of localizing programming. It's a lot of Chicago area music that I haven't heard. They do not go really far out, at least not most of the programs that I've been hearing. But it's a wonderful mix of old and fresh, new and lesser known artists, and they do a lot of sponsorships also. Does sponsoring local activities by just giving it airplug, does that help, Linda? Is that a WEMU activity?
Oh, yeah. We have great relationships with University Musical Society in Ann Arbor and their major concerts. Excellent relationships with Ann Arbor Summer Festival, Detroit Music Festival, and the others. But this is well worked out. It's an ad trade where our logo becomes part of their advertising. It's just that some of the lesser venues also need to step up and become part of that team that says, okay, if I buy an ad in the Metro Times or M-Live, WEMU logo on it, and allow WEMU to take some sort of ownership in the thing. And again, that's a learning curve on those lesser venues. We are working on it. It's part of a transition in the community. Now, with regard to programming music on the cutting edge, if I had evenings to program anymore, I would do that. But unfortunately, because we've taken that $600,000 budget cut over a period of 3 years, I lost evening programming. I lost overnight programming to syndicated programming. We're running the KPLU Jazz 24. It's very nice. It's very listenable. And then I've got daytime to program. And as far I got a program for people in their office. So I got a program for people at work, and I've got a program. So and I got to tell them it's 9:17, and this is what it's like on the roads in Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor. So I've got I got to wake up and smell the coffee. I got to be there for them in that moment.
Another comment from KPLU from Robin Lloyd. KPLU is engaging younger listeners through its School of Jazz program. We had high school age musicians come in to guest DJ, and they bring some incredible new music with them. Now here's a comment from Win from WWFM Jazz On 2. He's that Win Howard, the program manager of WWFM Jazz On 2. We're a terrestrial station, but heard on our HD signal and online. We're part of Mercer County Community College in Trenton, New Jersey. We're a community radio using jazz, blues, and gospel as our vehicle. We're bringing more contemporary jazz to the station, but I personally feel that the newer jazz is leaning more towards either R&B or pop. And this is something I wonder too. It may be that we have jazz fans here on the panel, and yet there's a large contingency of radio that I've heard across the country, and sometimes it's on stations that are seem to have a crossover to black pop music more. That it's very not. I don't want to say smooth jazz, but it is R&B to neo R&B to some looser hip hop to some more gospel inflected jazz. We don't have anybody on the panel, I don't think, who really represents that demographic tonight, but we will in our next panels about jazz radio. Is that a way to expand, to go towards the pop end of the jazz spectrum?
I kind of hate to see that myself. If I could comment on that, Howard.
Sure.
Jazz has always drawn upon popular music as a basis for what it does, but I don't know as going as far as Lady Gaga and Tony Bennett is really where we're developing new audience. I think we get into some trouble there. If we water it down enough, it doesn't resemble jazz anymore. It's not so much fun.
Well, do you think that Lady Gaga, I mean, I've heard a little bit of that record on the air, and she sounds like a typical jazz vocalist. I'm not a huge Tony Bennett fan, as a but
yep.
It's jazz, it's big band pop.
It swings.
It swings, yeah. What about the Robert Glaspers of the world, or Oscar Brown? No, not Oscar Brown.
Otis Brown.
Otis Brown. Very good record that's just come out from Blue Note. Has a revive music community sort of sense to it.
I'm into that. Yeah, we're on it. We're on it, and I am going to do my best with our program director to just say, man, I got to keep this on the air. I have a new program director at WEMU that I really respect, and actually, you know what? The previous director of kind of like free-form kind of thing with a little jazz and a little of this and a little of that, a little jazz. This guy wants a lot of real jazz. That I'm my new transition, and I'm gonna meet his goals to rebuild audience so that we can reestablish music back in the evening on WEMU and maybe go back to where we're going back out again in the evening. But I got to do it in the daytime, and I can make some Otis Brown and Robert Glasper work at 10:30 in the morning. I can do it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, I was just going to say, day parting is something we haven't talked about, but that's really especially significant. What Linda programs for her audience at 10:30 in the morning in Ypsilanti and the Detroit area is very different from what Jeff and I have programmed in the middle of the night on the weekend. We can go further out. We can use longer forms. I never felt any qualms about playing anything longer than 7 minutes if it held your attention for longer than 7 minutes, for instance, and music that is a little more challenging because people are paying more attention. So, Linda, I perfectly understand what you're talking about. You have people who are tapping their pencil on their coffee cup in their office, and you're programming for that audience. That's very understandable. And we haven't talked about day parting, but that's a significant factor in what kind of music you play at which time of day.
Brad, isn't it the case that your show, Creative Source, is heard at various times by various people checking it out when they want to?
No, it's mostly on in the middle of the night. That's the idea. But Brad?
Yes, that's right. My show is heard now. Well, now it's streaming on demand. We're sort of in this transitional period. When we go with the live stream, it'll be on a particular time on the weekend, and then it'll be in a rotation during the week at different times. And so people will hear it at different times. But I'm not so sure that the timing of it from a day part sense really makes all that much difference or all that much sense for a program that's heard in the U.S. versus Europe versus Asia because of the time change. But I wanted to mention, in terms of the programming of my show in particular, I've always said that fusion was a big part of it. Jazz rock fusion, jazz funk, uh, things that have more of an R&B, element to it. Certainly the Robert Glasper we've been all over, and Otis Brown, records of that nature. It certainly makes sense within the larger context of soulandjazz.com, because the other part of our programming is soul and R&B. I don't program my show necessarily to fit in with the greater scheme. It just happens to fit, and I think that But I don't necessarily. I'm not looking to go into a pop direction necessarily, but the fusion music that, again, doesn't often get heard in other places. And I'd also like to mention one other thing too, based upon one of the listeners' comments. In terms of big band these days, and students learning big band in schools and so forth, there's just a plethora of great contemporary big band releases out there, like Alan Chan and Peter Hand, and these. I just love this stuff, and I incorporate that into my shows too. I just think it's really exciting, the sort of reemergence of the big band with a real contemporary sound and feel to it.
Quite so. There's a lot of variety and a lot of great things happening in that big band world right now, in the large ensemble music. I've got a lot of fascinating comments coming in. Arturo Gomez, who I believe is the music director of KUVO Denver, says the new generations of jazz musicians encroaching on the established musicians has been taking place since the 30s. It's a matter of balance, playing the standards and giants of the past with the new crop of musicians who are touring. During the day at KUVO, we're more in the pocket. We swing, we bop. Evenings we lean towards more of a groove bands and the new artists. For us, it works well, as reflected by the contributions we get for day parts and evenings. We've noticed that many younger listeners come to us through the evening shifts and then cross over into the more mainstream day parts. However, there's very little crossover from day parts to the evening shows. Part of that is not only dislike for the music, but older listeners tend not to tune in the radio after 7 p.m. He's got some other comments that I hope to get to too. But here's a question for everybody from an attendee, Myrna. How do independent artists get their new jazz music to you? How do independent artists reach you with their music?
Send it to me.
Send it to you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a contribute form on the Jazz After Hours website, and artists and club owners and promoters and record labels are using it to not only send me information about gigs, but they're also uploading music files, or at the very least picking up on the mailing address there. And at this point, I don't really have any problem with getting enough music. I can't hardly keep up with it, actually. But Jim Wilke warned me. He warned me.
Oh, yeah.
That's for sure.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. My best advice is have a great EPK, a really good YouTube video, a really good one sheet that you attach as part of your stuff, and a couple of tracks that I can listen to, and to see if in 2 songs will the rest of the CD work for WEMU. I'm still thinking, I know it's old school, but I still think whole release rather than single. I still want to hear an artist's entirety and pick 4 to 5 really good numbers by you, and eventually, through the length of your living in the studio from 4 to 5 months, expose these 4 to 5 wonderful songs and give the listener a chance to hear you. And I will do that if you make that cut, if your music has the gravitas, and the artistry that the giants of jazz, like John Coltrane, if you think you can gird your loins and put yourself out there, send it to me. Give it a try. There you go.
Well, do you think it's possible for jazz radio to break an artist today? Any one
Yes.
station or stations working together, program hosts all agreeing this is an artist that American jazz audiences need? Is there anybody that you think you all program? Last year in the Jazz Awards and in the top 10 list that the JJA members put out, Cecile McLaurin-Salvin had an enormous hegemony of votes. Everybody seemed to like her. Is that somebody that jazz radio is going to break? Go ahead, Linda.
Amen.
I think we will.
That's all I
Yeah,
can
we
say.
will on it.
I think certainly Mac Avenue lent a lot of support behind her, so the promotional element was there, and jazz radio can certainly, break an artist. Often it's coordinated through an independent radio promoter who coordinates the radio play across the country. That does help in terms of the coordinating the airplay, making sure it all happens within a specified period of time. But certainly jazz radio can do that, and I think that that was an example of one.
Does Gregory Porter also benefited from that?
I think definitely, no question. He's gotten enormous amount of jazz radio play, and I think it's helped to really support his and boost his career.
I'm sorry, Jeff, I think I interrupted you.
Oh, no, I was just going to say jazz musicians are really on top of social media these days, the younger ones anyway, and I'm finding that to be not only useful, but really very exciting. So, in addition to the touring, in addition to having indie promoters work their record, they're also supporting themselves and each other, and jazz radio even, using Twitter and other social media platforms, and I think that's an excellent sign. I think that's a great sign of life in the jazz community, and I'm trying very hard to participate in it for Jazz After Hours and to build those connections, and I'm getting it back from the musicians too, and I'm really enjoying that.
So you're able to spend that time investing in the program by being on social media where you're not actually broadcasting.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I have the luxury of doing 8 hours a week as opposed to a 24/7 station.
Sure.
But I do invest a lot of time during the week, being in touch with musicians on social media and also following their tour schedules and learning more about them so that I can tell their stories and connect them with the audience and let people know that, for example, they're coming to Indianapolis, or they're going to be doing 3 or 4 nights in New York, and then they're going upstate to do a series of concerts, and they're playing college campuses, and I work really hard to try to connect the tours and the areas where the show is broadcast to the musicians, using social media and using my commentary on the air.
By the way, can I add something here? Jeff's website is just absolutely marvelous. It has so much interactive, and it's so inviting to listeners. He's doing a really great job with this website. He's expanded it so much on from what I had when I was doing the show. Lots of interactive elements. There are photos of the musicians as well as news about where they're playing, tying in with their new recordings and so on and so forth. It's a huge service to jazz as it exists today. The website's wonderful, and I think that's part of, I don't we talk that much about websites, but man, this is a winner. This is a killer website. Take a look at jazzafterhours.net.
Okay. From Jeremy Gotson, who's a JJ member in Omaha, I agree that streaming in cars is, but the big question is, will terrestrial radio be able to survive within this transitional period? Arturo Gomez says, in my opinion, terrestrial radio has at least 10 years of life left, maybe more. Terrestrial radio will always have pockets of strength, particularly with personalities who have long-term presences, says Jay Hunter. And R.B. Fruit from Alaska says, Tony Bennett and Lady Gaga is one thing. What about Esperanza Spalding? Some think she's sliding over the line into R&B and staying there. And I think Kara Gaffney agrees with Linda, whole CDs, not singles. And give, yeah, okay, that's where we are at the moment. So, oh, let's see here. Sorry, I've got bifurcated attention disorder. It does happen around this time. It's very impressive that we have people from all over the country who are digging into this conversation, and that you guys from all over the country. And we are going to follow up this webcast tonight with another and another and another on jazz radio. Is there more jazz radio than there are jazz audiences? It's just, you guys are doing such great work, working online, working in stations, being on social media to promote, and yet, and we know there's lots of music out there. How are we getting the audiences to pay attention, to take jazz seriously as a fun thing, to want to turn it on for their enjoyment, not as eating spinach?
I think that, you know, Jim spoke to this earlier about building our audience, building a younger audience, and those are going to be the listeners for the next several decades. And I think we always need to be reaching out to a younger audience. It's an ongoing thing because the younger audience now in 10 years is going to be older, and we need to continue to reach to a younger audience. And I firmly believe that, although people say that, you know, jazz is only 1 to 2% of the, you know, record sales and that sort of thing, and use that as some sort of gauge that jazz isn't that popular or can't be that popular. But I think it's all about exposure. You know, it's all about exposing young people to this music at an early age. It's about getting the programming out there in every way that we can, and we have to keep striving to do that. I mean, if you look at the popularity of jazz festivals all around the world, you know, any self-respecting city has a jazz festival these days, and people come out, and they're not necessarily hardcore jazz fans, but they come out because it's an event. They get exposed to the music, and they're successful. And I think that's an indication that there's a lot of people that say, you know, if you ask them, do you like jazz? Oh, no, I don't like jazz. But then if you mention a particular artist, they say, oh, yeah, I like that person. So I really think it's a matter of education and exposure, and that's what we're all of us are doing in this business, is trying to share this wonderful music with as many people as possible, and growing the audience.
And
do you think there's a generation gap between people, let me say, our age and younger people coming up? Are we able to identify apprentices who we can bring into the radio medium? And are we finding people want to go on the air, young people in their 20s and 30s, and want to learn from us about how to produce shows, about DJing, hosting, about radio production? Are you folks acting as mentors to younger radio professionals to be?
I'll jump in here. Yes. Oh, yep. I'll jump in again. Yes, WEMU is doing that. I've got a young man who's getting married on Saturday, but he's in his 20s. Footsteps. His name is Brad McNett. Get ready to hear him. Also, Daniel Long coming up at WEMU. And the other thing that I will pipe in and say, about 2 weeks ago, I booked a high school group for our monthly happy hour performance, and they knocked everybody's socks off. And everybody said to me, "You booked a bunch of high school kids?" And I said, "You have to come and hear them." And they did come and hear these high school kids, and now I've got some believers. So, yes, there are people coming up. You just have to give them the opportunity. Let them make some mistakes. Let them blow a few clams, but they'll come along. They'll come along, and you forgive them, because in 1976, when I first started on the air, I blew some clams, but Zoot Strider at WBBY in Westerville knew I had the soul, knew I had the spirit, and he let me go on. So there you go.
Mentoring, Brad?
Well, of course, I was with KSJS in San Jose for about 25 years, and my main role there was jazz music director. I did the jazz programming for the station, the jazz portion of our programming. But KSJS is the San Jose State University station, and so I literally mentored thousands of students there over the years. And do they all want to become jazz DJs? No, of course not. But there were a few. Over the years, there were always some that wanted to come in, some that came to San Jose State, especially, actually to do jazz on the air with us. And so over the years, we certainly mentored quite a few people there. And there's, in fact, there's a young guy there who's on the air right now who came along about 3 years ago, and it was just great to see a kid who was 23 years old who was passionate about, he wanted to play jazz on the air, and he's quite good, and it was just good for the soul to see that.
Jim Wilke, you found this young guy Jeff Hanley to try to bring in.
Jeff and I worked together back in the 70s. It's one of his first jobs in radio, as a matter of fact.
The temperature, the 70s. Back when it was
I also taught radio production classes at Bellevue Community College, which has a community radio station, KBCS, across the Lake Washington from Seattle. And, of course, what I taught a lot of those kids 20 years ago is obsolete information today with the advancements in the technology. But I think I instilled some passion in some of those kids, and I'm just really proud to say that when I hear them on the air today, I can say, they were once a student in my class. I feel really good about that. And they have, I've been able to instill an honesty about what they do, and a devotion to the music, no matter whether it's jazz or something else. But I'm real proud of them, every one of them I hear on the air.
Jeff, what about you? Have you found some youngsters even younger than you to try to bring along into this?
Well, I was a PD for a while, and felt like I was in the role of bringing some people along. I haven't had that opportunity here, although I have an intern who works with me on the show. Mostly she's working on the website and some of the social media components. But my situation might be a little specialized, at least the current situation. But I agree with Jim. I mean, for one thing, I know those people Jim is talking about, and I know how fond they are of him, and how much impact he has had on the broadcasters of the Seattle area, because many of those people are my friends. That's kind of where I came up in my early broadcast career, and he has had a profound impact. And I would hope that many markets around the country have guys like Jim who would provide that sort of nurturing, supportive environment for people to come up. And I had never heard the expression "blow some clams" before, but I think I'm going to adopt it. Very descriptive.
I've got a note from somebody from WCOM FM of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, who says, "I find it's hard to get new music to the jazz shows because we had few hosts actually visit and show support for these new artists." any suggestions on how to reach out to the new artists. Do you folks make a point of being public at live performances? Let
Sure.
people know that you're jazz hosts, and you do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Without it,
early days for me. Most of the connections I'm making in email and on social media, and I'm just really getting started in that. But I have every intention of being more present in the clubs when things kind of calm down for me a little bit.
And Brad, in Gilroy, California, just south of San Jose, are you spend time in the clubs or concerts?
Yeah, San Jose mainly. You know, there's several venues downtown, and I try to be there whenever I can after work because I work in downtown San Jose at the university. So I try to do that, and I also try to be present at as many festivals as possible. This past year, I was at San Sebastian, the Jazz Aldia in Spain, as well as the San Jose Jazz Festival, and I've been at Detroit in years past, and there was a recent World Music Festival at the MIM in Phoenix that I went to. So I try to make connections there, and like Jeff, I'm using social media quite a bit, Twitter and Facebook. Always trying to keep a presence on those platforms, let people know what I'm doing with the program, let artists know that I'm trying to do my little bit to support their music, and so trying to get the word out that way too.
We're sort of running out of time here. I do want to mention that Martin Kasdan Jr. has chimed in from Louisville, kind of grieving about the loss of coverage in the local radio station there. He said they had jazz 3 hours in the afternoon and 4 at night, syndicated shows like Jazz Live on Sundays. Now it's only 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. on Sundays, and all pre-recorded locally, 3 hours of mostly new, 1 hour big band, 1 hour focus on a different artist each week, 2 hours of pre-1965 jazz. He says that when they dropped the X, the jazz community was outraged. He demanded and got a full refund on his pledge. So careful, we don't want the pledges to be drawn back. I also have to say that RB, go ahead, Jim.
Well, I was just going to say another way in which we connect through KPLU in the Pacific Northwest area with local audiences is I make 30 or 40 public appearances a year as MC and so on, but I also am out in the field doing a lot of location recording. And one of the ways we really promote the regional jazz scene is I'm out there every other week with a live show recorded on location for Jazz Northwest on KPLU. And these broadcasts are mostly of regional artists, but they're also of festival appearances and so on and so forth. So we're doing a lot with live on location recordings that are unique. Also, KPLU is inviting artists into the studio, and they're doing almost weekly appearances by artists in the studio who are in for a brief interview, and they also perform 2 or 3 tunes as well. So these are really great tie-ins with the local jazz community and really go a long ways to increasing a station's visibility in public places and also for encouraging the local jazz scene. It works both ways. I think it's very valuable, and I'd really encourage stations to do that.
Linda, when you had KPLU, did you shop for programming, pre-produced programming that you were going to bring into WEMU, and KPLU stood out as a very meritorious choice?
The KPLU's Jazz 24 service was the most reasonable. Again, nobody wants to hear the $ word. And again, this is Linda Yohn, who never talked to you that way before, but I have to at this point in time because of the additional $100,000 budget cut. JazzWorks was too expensive for us to carry. Jazz with Bob Parlocha was already carried in the Detroit metropolitan area, so it made no sense for us to carry that program. We could not afford the additional membership to PRI, the NPR membership, and the NPR programs that we already carry and pay for are enough, along with our Associated Press membership. And thus, we went with KPLU's Jazz 24. It's nice. It's fun.
Are you carrying the new NPR show also, Jazz Night in America?
We cannot afford it. Unfortunately, this is something that we learned a really long time. The only NPR syndicated program that was anyways cost-effective for WEMU in terms of raising perhaps 1/10 of its carriage fee was Piano Jazz with Marion McPartland. None of the others raised enough funds to pay for themselves. And we tried them in various strips, like at 4 in the afternoon across the board, across the board, or 10 in the evening across the board, or 4 in a row on Saturday afternoon, or 3 in a row on Sunday evening. They never paid for themselves, never, with the exception of Marion McPartland's Piano Jazz, and that program probably raised 1/10 of what it cost to be aired, and thus we're not carrying it.
Linda, have you seen a decline in listenership, or is your listenership pretty steady, despite the...
Pretty steady. Pretty steady. Pretty steady, but people really want live and local presence in the evening if we hadn't had to live through another $100,000 budget cut. But that's just the budgetary situation in the state of Michigan. It goes all the way up to Lansing. I mean, people don't think about stuff like that, but it's true.
We're going to turn that around. I don't know how, but we're going to work on that this year.
Okay, and I am working on it. Trust me. I am working on rebuilding WEMU to where I've got live music back in the evening and a re-energized jazz enthusiastic audience in Ann Arbor. You know I want to do this.
And we know you will succeed. I also know that Jeff is going to build up that and sustain and build up the Jazz After Hours audience, and that Soul and Jazz is going to... Creative Source from Brad Stone is going to see a huge bump up from the JJ webinars also. We're very lucky here. We have participants from all over the country who have been listening. And outside the country, I've got to correct myself. Arby Frew is in Nanaimo, Canada. He is not in Alaska. He does not want to be identified with Alaska. Nanaimo is where he's based. And he's a radio person up there. So Arby, Martin Kasdan, Arturo Gomez, who I'd very much like to have as a panelist on one of our upcoming broadcast webinars. Thank you all for chiming in tonight. I'm Howard Mandel. This has been Talking Jazz from the Jazz Journalists Association, sponsored by the Jazz Crew through its Anita E. Berry Jazz Education Fund. And again, thanks to Brad Stone, Linda Yohn, Jim Wilke, Jeff Hanley. Turn into everybody's websites, listen to WEMU, send them your budgetary extras, and we're going to hear some more jazz radio maybe tonight. Thanks again to everybody for being on the webinar with me tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks for having me. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.